Hi BookTube! I'm here today with a discussion of Cloud Atlas. Just a warning, there are going to be spoilers throughout these videos. And yes, I said these videos because there's going to be two of them because there's just so much to talk about. I couldn't cram it all into one video. So basically, the summary. Cloud Atlas is a series of 6 stories that are kind of intertwined. They span from the 19th century to a post-apocalyptic future where we don't know what date it is anymore, and they're all told in different styles. So the first story is, I'm going to set the book down, the first story is that of Adam Ewing. It's told in a diary form. He's a lawyer on a ship and he's slowly being poisoned by his friend. In the second one we have letters. They're from Robert Frobisher. I had to look to pronounce his name. He's a musician and an admitted conman. This takes place in the 1930s. Then we jump to like the 1970s. We have a novel, kind of like a pulp detective novel about Louisa Ray. She's a journalist who's trying to shut down a nuclear plant. The next story we have, number 4, is a memoir, and that's of Timothy Cavendish. He's an editor who gets put into a old folks home against his will. Number 5 is an interview with Sondmi 451. She's a slave clone who eventually becomes self-aware and decides, she decides. I gotta give her that kind of autonomy to decide for herself. She decides to start a revolution. And number 6 is an oral story told by Zachary. He's a goat herder in a post-apocalyptic future. He meets a woman who then challenges all his ideas and beliefs. One of the most fascinating aspects of the book is the structure. It's not like 6 novellas, just one after the other. It's actually a chiastic structure, it's called, which is where the text is mirrored. This has been used, throughout time. Certain books in the Bible are told in that kind of structure. Beowulf is told in that structure where, the plot is more chiastic. This is the actual structure of the book is like that. So for example, in the first half of the book, we get the first half of stories. So that we go, the first story, the earliest story, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We get the full story of 6, and then we go backwards in time, from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I think that's really interesting because it really does a lot of commentary on the aspects discussed within the novel as well. So like the structure mimics, say, the evolution, or if you prefer, the devolution of language. So we all know that hopefully we all know that we come from an oral community. Like that's how we started out, with oral storytelling, and then we moved to written. And in the book, David Mitchell predicts that we'll end up as an oral storytelling community once again. And even that's like the language aspect of it, but even looking at the I guess the political structure of it, we start out, and the book kind of starts out too, along the agricultural societies to a corporatic society, which we are generally living in now, where corporations kind of rule things, and then go back to an agricultural society again. That's what he predicts for us in this novel. So the structure really works as a commentary on civilization, and it really shows that our future is embedded in our past, and that we owe a lot to the individuals in our past who have strived to effect change through their love of humanity and their willingness to be open to new ideas. Another thing that I really liked about this book is that you can really clearly see a lot of the influence in it. And it's full of derivative characters and style and plot points and everything, but that's done on purpose. And even the character of Timothy Cavendish, who's a literary editor, he says, I'm going to look at the screen for this, but it's been done 1,000 times before, as if there could be anything not done 100,000 times between Aristophanes and Andrew Lloyd Webber, as if art is the what, not the how. And I think that really works for the novel as well, because it's how the story is told that's really what made me like the book anyways. I'm just going to talk about the different influences on it. So the book in a whole is kind of similar to Ulysses in that each section is told in a different style. I mean, obviously Ulysses is amazing and it does it very much better. But I think what this novel does, instead of just different styles, it's different genres of literature. And it's obviously a book very much based in the 21st century. Each section, I'm just going to say what the influence was. In Adam Ewing's journals, we see a lot of Melville, particularly that of Billy Budd, I think. That's a great story. If you haven't read it, definitely read it. And it even touches on some issues that are addressed in the Billy Budd story in the Journal of Adam Ewing. Again, in the letters from Robert Frobisher to Sixsmith, we see a lot of Isherwood and Waugh there. Louisa Ray's story is done in the style of a pulp detective novel. In Timothy Cavendish, there's a nurse called Nurse Noakes, and she actually is very similar to Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We see a lot of Brave New World in Sonmi's story. A lot, from the clones to being servants to, you know, just pursuing pleasure instead of, you know, actual thinking. And then I think a lot of the influence on Zachary's story was kind of like the Orwellian warnings about the degradation of language and how we can lose all the depth and the meaning that we've built up in English if we don't, you know, work on keeping our language alive and let it devolve into this kind of pidgin type style. That's, you know, I really like that he's able to poke fun at himself with that first saying by Timothy Cavendish, while, you know, maintaining these different genres and the different obvious tropes within them and the character sets, and then being able to write in those various different styles. I think that's really it's really well done, I find. Another thing I want to talk about in this video, this will be the last thing I talk about, is the unreliable narrators. I love unreliable narrators because you're always just like, oh, what part of that's true, what part of it isn't true, does it matter if it's true or not? So because all the previous narratives are mentioned in the next story, so if even one narrator is deemed unreliable, then all the subsequent stories are kind of thrown out the window because they're then unreliable as well, right? So you don't know quite what to believe. And even within the certain sections, we get hints and such that these characters aren't necessarily reliable in their storytelling. So for example, Adam Ewing is a man who's very gullible, and he's actually being convinced that his brain's being eaten away by this parasite, and he's slowly being poisoned, so that messes with his brain quite a bit. And then we get Frobisher, who comes right out and says he's a con man. So are his letters to Sixsmith him trying to con Sixsmith on top of it all? Louisa Ray's story, which comes next, is admitted to be a novelization in the next story. So is Louisa Ray even, you know, a real person? Cavendish was put into an old folks home that may, you know, Does he have dementia? He has a stroke at one point. He's very kind of an arrogant character as well. So, you know, how much of it is him, you know, kind of being like building himself up. Sonmi then admits that, you know, she's made stuff up, and she says, not only does, I don't think that just directly applies to her interview, but as kind of a commentary on the book as a whole, she says, you know, weren't a lot of the things that happened in my plot a little too convenient, you know, like certain people showed up at the right time, she saw certain things at, you know, just the right time to, you know, make things happen in her, you know, character and everything. And lastly, Zachary is telling an oral story to someone. We're assuming it's children, but you know, how many times do you tell a story and then kind of embellish it? So I mean, it starts out, you know, The Fisherman's Tale. I think that's a commonly used term here, where, you know, you've actually caught a fish this big, but every time you tell the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's kind of, you know, hard to keep track. Also, it's also hard to keep track of an oral story, because every time you tell it, you're telling it a little differently. Yeah, so there's really, it's all rife with unreliable narrators. But as he says before, it's not the what, it's the how, and I think it's, I really like the idea that was presented in Doctor Who, that we're all stories in the end, and it's really up to us to tell our story and to have that story be a good one, and I think that's really what we see in this novel. So yeah, Cloud Atlas, just in basic summary, there's so much to explore in this book. That's what I really, really liked about it. There's so many different genres and tropes within it. I love looking at influences and making those kind of connections between books. The philosophical aspect of the novel is amazing too, which I'm going to be talking about in another video. And just a lot of the messages within it, whether they're on society, on personal aspects of your life, political messages, philosophical messages, they really jived with my own beliefs. So I really like them. If you're probably, well, I'd say anyone who's conservative is a lot more conservative than I am. Probably wouldn't agree with a lot of the messages in Cloud Atlas, but I'd say give it a go anyways. Challenge yourself, and definitely read Cloud Atlas. It's amazing. So let me know down below if you've read Cloud Atlas and what you thought of it, who your favorite character was in it, and if you have any other books along the same line. I'm really looking forward to reading more books like this. And remember to keep on reading.